Greece, God forbid. And of course,
on their website, that's rather tactless.
Yeah, the nice open CIA, the new open style CIA. But also yesterday, the top priest in Spain predicted social disorder and breakdown. And I take no joy in all of this, by the way. This is what concerns me, is you have an overriding political objective at massive economic cost. The social price is going to be enormous.
Okay, I'm just going to bring in Mark Hendrick now. So just on that, on the subchamber, on the two-tier Europe, is that something that you think we're heading towards, and is that something we should be scared of?
No, I don't think we should be scared of it, but I think it's heading in that direction. I mean, what will happen is this inner core, the Eurozone members, and what I call the pre-ins, those countries that eventually want to join the Euro. And there's only probably Britain, Denmark, and possibly Sweden that don't want to go in that direction. They're all moving in the same direction. We're moving in the opposite direction. The EEA that they referred to is meant to be a pre-in organisation, not for countries like Britain that purportedly want to move in the other direction. And what will happen is the Eurozone will result in an organisation that runs alongside the European Parliament probably. And these are countries that will go ahead whether we want to or not. What David's complaining about is that we won't have a chance to drag our feet and stop this happening. There will be what's called enhanced cooperation. Those countries that want to go ahead with further integration will go ahead with further integration. Those countries that don't quite want to go that far, and maybe are pre-ins, will be on an outer core. What David's talking about, and it's bizarre that he should leave UKIP to join the Conservative Party, although many on the right wing of the Conservative Party probably share UKIP views, is because the Conservative Party is in the moment self-destructing over this issue. It's the first case I've ever heard with David of a rat jumping on a sinking ship, because they're going nowhere with this.
I don't really want to
nowhere.
go down into British politics. We'll leave this for you
unseemly.
to
There's
talk
more
about
Labour
later.
voters who want out and stay in.
Liam Rachman, this two-tier Europe, is that something, how do you view that? And is that something that could work in a positive way, or will we inevitably get to a point where national sovereignty, people lose their vetoes, that people are going to be dragged in a direction that they don't want to be?
Well, I think there's an inevitable logic behind the single currency, and one thing I do agree with David on, I think it was intended to be an inevitable logic driving the people who adopted the single currency to a much closer union. And there's no reason why you can't have sort of civilized relations between those who join the single currency and those who don't. My caveat would be that the situation in the single currency zone is, to put it mildly, very turbulent. And so the assumption that this is going to be a smooth transition to a much closer union, and then we'll kind of know what we're dealing with, I think is very moot. Even within we talk about from a specifically British point of view about the difficulties we have with them, but look at the arguments between the traditional motor of the European Union, Germany and France now, about what they're going to do, where they should proceed, should there be things like Euro bonds and so on. It's far from clear that this is that they have a route map that they're all going to follow.
But when there's a treaty, they will.
Yeah, but I don't think, will they get the treaty ratified? Look what happened to the EU constitution, and I'm not sure they'll even be able to negotiate the treaty.
Well, the Germans won't go ahead without a treaty because they're not prepared to bail out the rest of Europe.
Sure. Yeah.
With the current situation.
So in terms of the common foreign security policy, which is where we started, what direct impact do you think the current economic crisis will have on that? I know you have a different interpretation of whether it's a positive impact or a negative, but what actual impact do you think it will have?
Well, I mean, the Finnish Prime Minister, former Finnish Prime Minister, mentioned resources. At the moment, the EEAS budget, there's a big battle to increase their budget by twice inflation. Now, of course, that's all part of the bigger picture. They're going for 450 million euros. I mean, there's 150 ambassadors, or those that work in the EES, who are paid more than William Hague. And there's a huge resource base in the EES already, and I didn't hear many triumphs this morning. I don't know about you. I mean, I'm on the Security and Defence Committee of the European Parliament, and I do monitor like Somalia piracy operations and things like that. But there isn't any great triumph coming out of this huge amount of expenditure. What is coming out of it is a huge amount of duplication and override in terms of, and conflict, not only between, as we saw, between the Commission and the EAS, they can't get their act together, but between the EAS and our embassies. I don't want to see British embassies scaled back in order to allow, this diplomatic presence. And I asked the question of embassies, which nation do you represent? Which nation do EU embassies represent? The superstate, I think.
Gideon, do you think that, to come back to one of your first points, that in terms of forging foreign policy, the EU wasn't doing very well, particularly before 2008. Is it possible then that the financial crisis could actually have a positive effect on forging the foreign policy simply because of the need to pool and share resources in a way that until now they've been able to duplicate because they can?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's clearly a financial pressure to do it, and I don't kind of have the, I think, slightly visceral reaction David has to seeing these missions with the flag. I mean, that seems to me that if you're an EU citizen and you're somewhere and your nation doesn't actually have a strong representation there, it could be rather useful to have a European mission there which is pledged to kind of help you out in a consular way and would actually represent European interests. As a matter of fact, Europe already negotiates as a bloc on trade, so it would make the European delegation there, given that we've just heard that a lot of diplomacy these days is about economics, to have that delegation there representing them. I don't find that inherently sinister, but it is the fact that the British and the French in particular, who are still members of the European, of the UN Security Council, and regard themselves as having a global role, will be less willing to delegate the whole, everything to the European Union. That's just not going to happen. And as a result, there is an inherent tension. And you do hear complaints from other countries that the British and the French are deliberately kind of gumming up the works of the EEAS because they don't want to give everything up. Well, that's a tension, but I think it's a manageable.
Mark Hendrick, one more question to you before we open it out to the floor. You mentioned the Kissinger line about who do you phone when you want to phone Europe. Well, it's obvious now you phone Cathy Ashton.
Phone Angela Merkel.
And even if you do decide to phone Cathy Ashton, I mean, she's got to phone quite a few of her friends before she gets back to you, isn't she?
Well, the problem is that the way that it's set up at the moment, post-Lisbon, is that the common foreign and security policy is actually the lowest common denominator of what all the 27 will agree on. What it isn't is the highest common factor on what the major nations and the majority of the smaller nations would actually agree on. And that's the whole problem. While you've got one member state that can throw the spanner into the whole works and stop the whole thing, then it's not going to work. And that's why this inner core will come about, and that's why you'll have an inner core that will make the major decisions, and those on the periphery will have access to the single market, will obviously have to go along with certain other things like environmental regulation, etc., but won't be fully fledged members. And I think that's where Britain will be, being a realist about this. I mean, whilst I'd like to see us more fully engaged, I don't think the British people are ready for that. But I think we will be in that outer core, and certainly not. I mean, David says, well, he supports the Prime Minister's view about reform and having a referendum. Well, I think he supports that view on the basis that he doesn't think the Prime Minister will get reform, and eventually we will come out. And that is a view, I think, on the majority of the backbenches of the Conservative Party at the moment. That's where we are.
On that note, let's open it up to the floor. Questions, please. First there in the yellow tie. Jonathan, if you wouldn't mind telling us who you are and who your questions to.
Just like that, yeah. Ivan Volodin, the Russian embassy. Just to continue this discussion, so if the UK leaves the EU, what consequences it will have for the EU foreign policy and the EU's standing as a global actor, and for Britain's standing as a global actor?
Gideon, you're on the table.
Well, I think it will damage both, actually. I think that the British obviously will point to the fact that we still have the UN Security Council membership and so on. we still have a special relationship with the United States, but the US has actually made it pretty explicit on a couple of occasions that they really would prefer Britain to stay inside the EU, because for purely American national goals, it's kind of helpful to have the British who agree with them on a lot of things in the EU fighting for that. So I don't think that the special relationship will be enhanced by leaving the EU. On the contrary, I do think we have, as I say, diminishing military might. So, you know, Britain will still be a player, but it will be at the margins a less powerful player, I think, if it's not in the EU. I also think the EU, and I think that they haven't yet begun to focus on it, will actually be damaged by Britain leaving. Partly, it doesn't look great, you know, that you've got this country with this organisation, a lot of which is prestige has been the fact that so many people are queuing up to join it. Everybody wants to be a member of this club. Now, if you've got a big member state at the time of an economic crisis saying, you know what, we can actually do without it and we'll leave, at a time when European prestige is already weakening, I don't think it's helpful. And also, Britain does bring some resources in terms of its diplomatic network, etc., etc. So it's not helpful to the EU either.
David Campbell, do you accept that it would hurt Britain too, that Britain would be less powerful there outside the EU?
No, I don't at all, actually. I mean, you know, what is happening, in my view, is there's competition between the EES and Britain. I mean, you mentioned the Security Council of the UN. I mean, the EU wants our seat. You know, it wants to take a lot of our influence over. And I just don't think that's acceptable. We're better off on our own. You know, the City of London is the largest global financial centre in the world. You know, it's a major player, but it's been compromised by the financial transactions tax, a tax and the regulatory burden is too great. Free trade agreements are failing now, like Canada is at risk at the moment, I'm hearing, because of human rights clauses being attached to those trading agreements. At the same time, Iceland is about to announce a free trade agreement with China, and New Zealand's got one with China, but the EU's failed to get one with China and is about to go into a trade war with China over solar panels. So I just think in all these different ways, economic, trade, diplomacy, we I think should restore our links with the Commonwealth. You know, the Commonwealth is the future, not the past. India's middle class by 2050 will be 600 million, which will be more than the EU is now. That's its middle class. And that, I think, is the future. And we have